I watched the black SUV roll past my house for the third time that morning, and something about it made my coffee taste bitter. My name is Frank Kellerman, and I had lived at 2847 Sycamore Lane in Riverside, California, for exactly 8 months when everything started going sideways. The house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home with cream-colored siding and a small front lawn that I kept religiously trimmed to exactly 2.5 inches, per HOA regulations. I had read the covenant agreements front to back before buying the property, knowing full well what I was getting into with the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. What I did not anticipate was the woman who would make my life a living hell. Patricia Henderson was her name, and she was the president of the Riverside Meadows HOA. She was 52 years old, had short blonde hair that looked perpetually helmet-like, and wore pantsuits in colors that could only be described as aggressively beige. I first met her during the mandatory new homeowner orientation meeting, where she spent 2 full hours explaining the importance of maintaining property values and community standards. Her voice had this grating quality that made my teeth hurt, like nails on a chalkboard mixed with a smoke detector running low on batteries. For the first few months, everything was fine. I followed the rules, paid my HOA dues on time, and kept to myself. I worked from home as a software consultant, which meant I was around the neighborhood quite a bit. That was probably my first mistake, being visible. Patricia seemed to take particular interest in homes where the owners were frequently present, as if our very existence was a threat to her carefully curated suburban paradise. The problem started in late February. I had put out my trash cans on a Tuesday evening around 7 p.m., knowing that Wednesday was collection day. According to the HOA rules, trash cans could be placed at the curb after 6 p.m. the evening before collection. I was well within my rights, but at 7:30 p.m. my doorbell rang. When I answered, Patricia stood there with a clipboard and a look of profound disappointment. "Mr. Kellerman," she said, her voice dripping with false politeness, "I noticed your trash receptacles are visible from the street." "Yes," I replied, confused. "Tomorrow is trash day." "The receptacles are facing the wrong direction. The handles should be oriented away from the street for aesthetic purposes." I blinked at her. "That is not in the covenant. It is an unwritten standard that all long-time residents understand." Well, I was not aware of any unwritten standards. "The written ones are complicated enough." Her smile tightened. "I am just trying to help you fit into our community, Mr. Kellerman. We have certain expectations here." I politely told her I would keep it in mind and close the door. I did not turn my trash cans around. That was apparently my second mistake. Over the next few weeks, the violations started piling up. I received a written warning because my mailbox had a minor scratch on it. Another warning came because I had parked my car on the street overnight when my garage door opener broke. A third warning arrived because someone reported that my lawn looked slightly yellower than my neighbor's, suggesting I was not watering appropriately. Each violation came with a potential fine ranging from $50 to $200. I started documenting everything. Every warning, every interaction, every time I saw Patricia driving slowly past my house taking photographs. My girlfriend Bethany Sullivan thought I was being paranoid at first. "They are just really strict about the rules," she said one evening as we sat on my back patio. Bethany was a paralegal at a firm downtown, practical and level-headed, with long dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude. "Ignore them and they will probably move on to bothering someone else." "I do not think that is how this works," I said, showing her the latest violation notice. "Look at this. They are claiming my house number is too small and difficult to read from the street." She squinted at the paper. Your house numbers are the same size as everyone else's on the block. Exactly. This is harassment, Frank. I know, but what can I do about it? That question would haunt me for the next several months. In March, things escalated. I came home from a grocery run to find a bright orange sticker on my front door declaring that my property was in violation of community standards and subject to immediate review. The violation. Someone had reported seeing a commercial vehicle parked in my driveway. The commercial vehicle in question was a plumber's van that had been there for exactly 45 minutes while he fixed my kitchen sink. I called the HOA office and got Patricia on the phone. The covenant clearly states no commercial vehicles, she said primly. He was performing a repair. That is a temporary service visit, not parking a commercial vehicle. The language of the covenant does not differentiate. So you are telling me that any time I need a repair person, a delivery, or any kind of service, I am in violation. You should have requested a temporary variance in writing at least 72 hours in advance. I felt my blood pressure rising. How am I supposed to know 72 hours in advance that my sink is going to break? That is not my problem, Mr. Kellerman. The rules exist for a reason. I hung up before I said something I would regret. Bethany convinced me to attend the next HOA board meeting in April. It was held in the community clubhouse, a bland beige building that matched Patricia's aesthetic perfectly. About 20 homeowners showed up, most of them older retirees who nodded along with everything Patricia said. I sat in the back and waited for the open forum portion of the meeting. When my turn came, I stood up and addressed the board calmly. I have lived here for 6 months and received more violation notices than I can count, I said. Many of these violations are for minor issues or situations beyond my control. I follow the rules as they are written in the covenant, but I keep being told about unwritten standards and expectations. I would like clarity on what exactly is expected of homeowners. Patricia smiled at me like a shark. Mr. Kellerman, we appreciate your feedback. However, the board maintains discretion in interpreting and enforcing community standards. If you find our rules too burdensome, perhaps this community is not the right fit for you. Several of the older residents murmured in agreement. I felt my face flush. I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for consistent and fair application of the rules. And that is exactly what you are receiving, Patricia said, her tone final. Next speaker, please. I left that meeting knowing things were only going to get worse. I was right. In early May, the security guards appeared. I was working at my home office desk when I noticed a white sedan with amber lights on top rolling slowly down the street. It had Riverside Meadows Security emblazoned on the side in blue letters. I watched as it made a complete circuit of the block, then disappeared. Over the next few days, I saw the car more frequently. Sometimes it would park at the end of the street for extended periods. Other times it would cruise past multiple times per hour. I asked my neighbor, an older man named George, if he knew what was going on. Oh, the HOA hired a security company, he said, watering his flowers. Patricia said it was to maintain safety and monitor for violations. Monitor for violations? You mean spy on residents, George shrugged. I guess. Seems a bit much if you ask me, but nobody asked me. I did some digging and found out that the HOA board had approved the security contract at a special meeting that was not properly announced to all residents. The company was called Sentinel Protection Services, and they had been hired on a 6-month contract for an undisclosed amount, presumably paid for by our HOA dues. The security guards themselves were concerning. There were 2 of them who rotated shifts. A guy named Derek who looked like he had washed out of police academy, and another guy named Tony who had the personality of a brick wall. They drove around in their white sedan, wore uniforms that looked uncomfortably similar to police uniforms, and acted like they had actual authority. My first direct encounter with them came on a Saturday afternoon in mid-May. I was washing my car in my driveway, something I had done dozens of times without issue. Derek pulled up to the curb and got out of his vehicle. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his hand resting on his belt in a way that was clearly meant to be intimidating. "We have received reports of excessive water usage." I looked at him, then at the hose in my hand, then back at him. "I am washing my car. There are drought restrictions in California. The HOA expects residents to be mindful of water conservation. I am aware of the drought restrictions. Washing a car is permitted as long as I use a shut-off nozzle, which I am." I held up the nozzle to show him. "I am going to need to see your identification." "Excuse me, your identification. We need to document this interaction." "You need to leave my property," I said, my patience evaporating. "You have no legal authority to demand my identification." Derek's face reddened. "I am contracted security for this community. You are not a police officer. You have no law enforcement powers. Please leave." He stared at me for a long moment, then got back in his car and drove away. But he circled back around and parked at the end of my street, where he sat for the next hour clearly watching my house. I called Bethany immediately. "They cannot do that," she said after I explained what happened. "Private security guards have no more authority than any regular citizen. They certainly cannot demand identification or detain people. So what do I do? Document everything. Every interaction, every time they harass you, and we might want to talk to a lawyer. This is insane." "I should not need a lawyer because my HOA hired rent-a-cops." "I know, baby, but we need to protect you." Over the next 2 weeks, the security guards became a constant presence in my life. They would park outside my house for hours at a time. If I went for a walk, one of them would slowly follow me in their car. When I got home from running errands, they would pull up right behind me and watch me unload my groceries. It was invasive, unsettling, and clearly intentional. Other residents started experiencing similar treatment, but I seemed to be the primary target. I later found out through George that Patricia had specifically instructed the security company to pay special attention to my property for potential violations. The situation reached a breaking point on June 3rd. I had just returned from visiting Bethany's apartment across town and pulled into my driveway around 9 p.m. Tony, the brick wall security guard, pulled in right behind me, blocking me in. He got out of his vehicle and approached my car before I could even open my door. I rolled down my window. "What do you want?" "Step out of the vehicle, sir." "Absolutely not. You have no authority to make that request. We have received reports of suspicious activity at this address." "This is my house. I live here. There is nothing suspicious about me coming home." "Sir, if you do not comply, I will have to call the police." "Go ahead," I said, my heart pounding. "Call them. I would love to explain to the police how you are harassing me." Tony's hand moved to his belt, where he had what looked like pepper spray and a flashlight. He did not grab anything, but the implication was clear. He was trying to intimidate me through the suggestion of force. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I am documenting this interaction," I said clearly. "You are blocking my vehicle in my own driveway and threatening me. State your name and the name of your employer for the record." Tony's expression darkened. "Turn off the camera." "No." We stared at each other for a long moment. Then he stepped back, got in his vehicle, and backed out of my driveway. But he parked on the street directly in front of my house and stayed there until after midnight. I know because I could not sleep, kept watching out my window to make sure he did not try to come back. The next morning, I found a violation notice on my door. According to the HOA, I had arrived home after quiet hours began at 9 p.m. and my car door closing had been too loud, disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. The fine was $150. That was it. I was done. Bethany helped me find a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes and civil harassment cases. His name was Michael Torres, a sharp guy in his 40s who had a reputation for taking on overreaching homeowners associations. We met at his office in downtown Riverside on a Tuesday afternoon. "This is pretty egregious," Michael said after I showed him my documentation. I had brought printed copies of every violation notice, photographs of the security guards parked outside my house, videos of my interactions with them, and a detailed timeline of everything that had happened. "The HOA has hired private security with no legal authority, and they are using intimidation tactics to harass you." "Can we sue them?" I asked. "Oh, we can definitely sue them. The question is what we sue for and what outcome we want. We could go for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, possibly even false imprisonment depending on how we interpret some of these interactions. I just want them to stop, and I want everyone to know that what they are doing is illegal." Then we file suit against both the HOA and Sentinel Protection Services. We make it public, we make it expensive for them, and we make it clear that this behavior is unacceptable. Bethany squeezed my hand. "Do it." We filed the lawsuit on June 15th, exactly 10 months after I moved into my house on Sycamore Lane. The complaint named the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association, Patricia Henderson in her capacity as HOA president, and Sentinel Protection Services as defendants. We were suing for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and violation of my civil rights. The lawsuit also sought an immediate restraining order preventing the security guards from coming within 100 feet of my property, and requiring the HOA to cease all retaliatory actions against me. The response was swift and predictable. Patricia showed up at my door the day after we filed, furious and red-faced. "How dare you?" she hissed when I opened the door. "You are suing the HOA. Do you have any idea what this will cost the community?" "You should have thought about that before you decided to harass me for the better part of a year," I said calmly. "We have done nothing wrong. We are simply enforcing community standards. You hired security guards to stalk me. You have issued frivolous violation after frivolous violation. You have made it your personal mission to make my life miserable because I had the audacity to question your authority. Get off this property," I said, my voice hard, "and do not come back. All future communication goes through my lawyer." She opened her mouth to say something else, then apparently thought better of it. She turned and stalked back to her car, a silver Lexus that was always pristinely clean. The next few weeks were tense. The security guards continued their patrols, but they stayed away from my house specifically, likely on the advice of the HOA's lawyer. I still saw them around the neighborhood, though, and other residents started asking me questions about the lawsuit. George came over one evening with a 6-pack of beer. "I heard about what you were doing," he said, settling into one of my patio chairs. "Good for you. Patricia has been a tyrant for years, but nobody has had the guts to stand up to her." "It is not about guts," I said, accepting a beer. "It is about being pushed too far." "Well, either way, a lot of us are rooting for you. There is actually talk about recalling her from the board." "Really?" "Yeah, this whole security thing has rubbed people the wrong way. It is expensive, it is invasive, and now with the lawsuit, People are asking questions about how the HOA is being run. That was encouraging news. I had worried that the lawsuit would make me a pariah in the neighborhood, but it seemed like I was not the only one fed up with Patricia's reign of terror. The preliminary hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for July 10th. Michael prepared me thoroughly, explaining what to expect and how to present my case. The hearing would be in front of a judge who would determine if there was enough evidence of harassment to grant a temporary restraining order while the full lawsuit proceeded. The courthouse in Riverside was busy that morning, full of people dealing with various legal matters. Bethany came with me for moral support, holding my hand as we waited outside the courtroom. Michael arrived looking confident in a sharp navy suit. "Remember," he said, "just tell the truth. Answer the judge's questions directly and calmly. The evidence speaks for itself." When we entered the courtroom, I saw Patricia sitting with an older man in an expensive suit, presumably the HOA's attorney. She glared at me with such intensity that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Ellen Morrison. She had gray hair, sharp eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She reviewed the filings in front of her for a few minutes, then looked up. "This is a request for a temporary restraining order against the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association and Sentinel Protection Services," she said. "Mr. Torres, present your case." Michael stood and laid out everything systematically. He showed the judge photographs of the security guards parked outside my house. He played the video of Tony blocking me in my driveway. He presented the timeline of violation notices and highlighted the pattern of escalating harassment. He explained how private security guards had no legal authority to demand identification, detain residents, or use intimidation tactics. "Your Honor," Michael concluded, "my client has been subjected to a campaign of harassment that has significantly impacted his quality of life and his ability to peacefully enjoy his own home. The defendants have created an environment of intimidation and surveillance that serves no legitimate purpose and violates my client's basic rights as a homeowner and a citizen." The HOA's attorney stood next, a man named Richard Pemberton, who had the look of someone who spent too much time at country clubs. "Your Honor, the HOA denies any harassment. They simply hired security to maintain community standards and ensure resident safety. Mr. Kellerman has been a problematic homeowner from the beginning, accumulating numerous violations and showing a pattern of disregard for community rules. The security presence is not targeted at him specifically, despite what he may believe." Judge Morrison looked skeptical. "Counselor, I am looking at photographs showing a security vehicle parked outside Mr. Kellerman's home for hours at a time. I am seeing video of a security guard blocking his vehicle. How exactly is that not targeted harassment?" The security guards were responding to reports and conducting routine patrols. Routine patrols that involved blocking a resident in his own driveway. Pemberton hesitated. That was an overstep by an individual guard, not a reflection of HOA policy. "And yet the HOA employs this company and is responsible for their actions," the judge said. She turned to me. "Mr. Kellerman, I would like to hear from you directly. How has this situation affected you?" I stood, my legs feeling shaky. "Your Honor, I bought my home in Riverside Meadows because it seemed like a safe, quiet community. I have tried my best to follow all the rules, even the ones that seem petty or unreasonable. But from the moment I questioned the HOA president, I became a target. I have been followed, watched, intimidated, and harassed. I cannot take out my trash, wash my car, or come home from work without feeling like I am under surveillance. It has affected my sleep, my work, and my relationship. I just want to live in peace in the home I own." Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "The court finds sufficient evidence of harassment to grant a temporary restraining order. Sentinel Protection Services and its employees are hereby ordered to maintain a distance of at least 100 feet from Mr. Kellerman's property at all times. The Riverside Meadows HOA is ordered to cease all retaliatory actions against Mr. Kellerman pending the resolution of the underlying lawsuit. Any violation of this order will result in contempt charges." She banged her gavel, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. Outside the courthouse, Bethany threw her arms around me. "You did it," she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "We did it," I corrected. "I could not have done this without you and Michael." Michael shook my hand. "This is just the first step. The full lawsuit is still ahead." "But this is a significant victory." He was right. The restraining order made the local news, and suddenly everyone in Riverside was talking about the HOA that hired security guards to harass residents. The story was picked up by several news outlets, and I even did an interview with a local investigative reporter who was doing a broader piece on HOA overreach in California. The publicity was not good for the Riverside Meadows HOA. Several residents started asking for audits of how their dues were being spent, particularly the money that went to Sentinel Protection Services. It turned out that Patricia had signed the security contract without proper board approval, exceeding her authority as president. In early August, I received a call from George. "You need to come to the emergency HOA meeting tonight," he said, excitement in his voice. "Things are getting wild." I was not technically required to attend, but curiosity got the better of me. Bethany and I showed up at the community clubhouse at 7 p.m. to find it packed with angry homeowners. The energy in the room was electric and hostile. Patricia sat at the front table with the other board members, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a defensive posture that told me she knew she was in trouble. A homeowner named Susan stood up first. "I want to know why we are paying thousands of dollars for security guards to harass our neighbors. That is not what I signed up for when I moved here." Another resident, a man named Carlos, joined in. "And I want to know why this contract was signed without proper approval. We have bylaws for a reason." The meeting devolved into chaos quickly. Resident after resident stood up to voice their complaints about Patricia's leadership, the security guards, the endless petty violations, and the lawsuit that was now costing the HOA money in legal fees. Patricia tried to defend herself, but her explanations rang hollow. "I was acting in the best interest of the community," she insisted, her voice shrill. "Property values depend on maintaining standards. Property values suffer when we get sued for harassment," someone shouted back. Finally, an older woman named Dorothy made a formal motion to recall Patricia from her position as HOA president. The motion was seconded immediately. When the vote was called, it was not even close. Patricia was removed from the board by an overwhelming majority. She gathered her things in silence, her face red with humiliation, and left the clubhouse without another word. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. With Patricia gone, the HOA's approach changed dramatically. A new president was elected, a retired accountant named Martin who seemed genuinely interested in fair governance. One of his first acts was to terminate the contract with Sentinel Protection Services effective immediately. The full lawsuit still had to be resolved, though. The HOA's insurance company got involved and negotiations began in September. Michael explained that they would likely want to settle rather than go to trial. "Trials are expensive and unpredictable," he said, "and the facts here are not good for them. They know they will lose. He was right. In late October, the HOA's legal team offered a settlement. They agreed to pay me $50,000 in damages, cover all of my legal fees, formally apologize, and expunge all of the bogus violations from my record. They also agreed to implement new policies regarding HOA enforcement and to never hire private security without proper oversight and limitations. Michael advised me to accept. It is a good settlement, Frank. You have made your point, you have gotten justice, and you will be compensated for what you went through. I talked it over with Bethany that evening. What do you think? I asked. I think you have already won, she said. Patricia is gone, the security company is gone, and the HOA is completely changing how they operate. Taking the settlement means you can move on with your life. She was right. I accepted the settlement in early November. The formal settlement agreement was signed on November 20th, just over a year after my nightmare began. The HOA issued a written apology that was distributed to all residents, acknowledging that I had been subjected to unfair treatment and harassment. The check for $50,000 arrived a week later, but the story did not quite end there. In early December, I got a call from Michael. You might want to turn on the news, he said. I switched on the local news channel to see a story about Sentinel Protection Services. Apparently, after our lawsuit, several other communities that had hired the company started investigating their practices. It turned out that Derek and Tony, the two guards who had harassed me, both had criminal records that should have disqualified them from security work. Derek had a prior assault conviction, and Tony had been fired from a previous security job for excessive force. The state licensing board opened an investigation into Sentinel Protection Services for employing unqualified guards and exceeding the scope of their authority. Within a few months, the company lost its license and shut down completely. As for Patricia Henderson, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she moved out of Riverside Meadows in January. She sold her house and relocated somewhere in Arizona. I never saw her again. Life in the neighborhood improved dramatically after that. Martin ran the HOA with common sense and transparency. Violation notices were reserved for actual issues, not petty nonsense. The new board established an appeals process for homeowners who felt they were being treated unfairly. And most importantly, nobody was being stalked or harassed by fake security guards. Bethany and I got engaged in February, about 14 months after the whole ordeal began. We were sitting on my back patio, the same place where we had discussed the harassment so many times, when I asked her to marry me. Are you sure you want to marry someone who sues their HOA? I joked as I slipped the ring on her finger. She laughed. I want to marry someone who stands up for what is right, even when it is hard. That is exactly who you are. We set the wedding date for September and started planning, but there was something I needed to do first. In March, I organized a meeting with several other homeowners who had expressed interest in reforming how HOAs operated in California. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Riverside, about a dozen of us, all people who had experienced various forms of HOA overreach. We need to push for legislative changes, I said. HOAs have too much power with too little oversight. They can fine residents, place liens on homes, and apparently hire security guards to harass people, all with minimal accountability. A woman named Jennifer, who had her own HOA horror story, nodded enthusiastically. We should organize, create a group that advocates for homeowner rights and pushes for reform. That meeting led to the formation of the California Homeowner Rights Coalition, a grassroots organization dedicated to reforming HOA laws and protecting homeowner rights. We started small, but the group grew quickly. By summer, we had hundreds of members and were meeting with state legislators about potential reforms. One of our key proposals was requiring HOAs to obtain explicit approval from a majority of homeowners before hiring any kind of private security, and mandating that any security personnel have clear, limited roles that did not include law enforcement activities. We also pushed for stronger penalties for HOAs that engaged in harassment or retaliatory actions against homeowners. The legislative process was slow, but we made progress. In August, a state assembly member agreed to sponsor a bill incorporating many of our proposals. It would be a long fight, but we were committed. Bethany and I got married on a perfect September day. The ceremony was in a garden venue overlooking the hills, with close friends and family in attendance. George was there, along with several neighbors from Sycamore Lane who had supported me throughout the lawsuit. Even Martin, the new HOA president, came and wished us well. As Bethany and I danced at our reception, I thought about everything that had happened. The harassment, the lawsuit, the settlement, and now the advocacy work. It had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also taught me something important about standing up for yourself and fighting back against injustice, even when it comes from something as seemingly mundane as a homeowners association. What are you thinking about? Bethany asked, her head resting on my shoulder. Just how far we have come, I said. A year and a half ago, I was being followed by fake security guards. Now we are married and working to change the system. You should be proud, she said. You did not just fight for yourself. You fought for everyone who has been bullied by their HOA. She was right. The settlement money had been nice, and getting Patricia removed from power had been satisfying. But the real victory was the changes we were making, the conversations we were starting, and the awareness we were raising about HOA abuses. The California Homeowner Rights Coalition continued to grow throughout the fall. We held town halls, published guides for homeowners dealing with HOA disputes, and provided resources for people who needed legal help. Several lawyers, inspired by our case, started offering pro bono services for homeowners fighting unfair HOA actions. In November, we got word that our proposed legislation was moving forward. The bill, officially titled the Homeowner Protection and HOA Accountability Act, had gained significant support in the state assembly. It would require HOAs to follow strict guidelines when hiring security, prohibit retaliatory actions against homeowners who complained or sued, and establish an ombudsman office to investigate HOA abuses. I was invited to testify before the State Assembly Committee considering the bill in December. Standing in the Capitol building in Sacramento, telling my story to elected officials felt surreal, but it also felt necessary. Homeowners associations serve an important function, I told the committee, but they need oversight and accountability. No homeowner should have to go through what I went through. No one should be harassed, stalked, or intimidated in their own home because they questioned an HOA's authority. The committee members asked thoughtful questions, and several expressed support for the bill. When I finished testifying, the committee chair thanked me for my courage in speaking out. The bill passed out of committee in January and moved to the full assembly. Bethany and I made several trips to Sacramento over the next few months, meeting with legislators and advocating for the bill. It was hard work, but it was also energizing. We were making a difference. In March, the bill passed the state assembly with a strong bipartisan majority. It still needed to clear the state Senate and be signed by the governor, but the momentum was clearly on our side. While all of this was happening, life on Sycamore Lane had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Bethany moved in after the wedding, and we made the house fully ours. We painted the spare bedroom, planted a garden in the backyard, and even installed a new mailbox, properly sized and approved by the HOA without any hassle. George became a good friend, often coming over for weekend barbecues. Other neighbors who had been too intimidated to speak up during Patricia's reign started being friendlier. The neighborhood felt like an actual community for the first time since I had moved in. In April, I got a Facebook message from someone I did not know. Her name was Rachel, and she lived in a community in San Diego that had an HOA situation similar to what I had experienced. "I read about your case," she wrote. "My HOA hired security guards who are harassing my family. I do not know what to do. Can you help?" I connected Rachel with Michael Torres and the California Homeowner Rights Coalition. Within a few weeks, she had filed her own lawsuit and was getting support from other homeowners in her community. Her case became the second major HOA security harassment lawsuit in California, and it drew even more attention to the issue. By summer, similar cases were emerging across the state. It turned out that several HOAs had hired private security companies with minimal oversight, and many of those companies were employing the same intimidation tactics that Sentinel Protection Services had used on me. The pattern was clear, and the need for reform was undeniable. The Homeowner Protection and HOA Accountability Act passed the California State Senate in July. All that remained was the governor's signature. The California Homeowner Rights Coalition organized a campaign encouraging people to contact the governor's office in support of the bill. On August 15th, almost exactly 2 years after I filed my lawsuit, Governor Newsom signed the bill into law. Bethany and I were invited to the signing ceremony in Sacramento, along with other advocates and homeowners who had shared their stories. This law will protect Californians from HOA overreach and ensure that homeowners have rights and recourse when they are treated unfairly, the governor said during his remarks. No one should be harassed in their own home. After the ceremony, Bethany and I stood outside the Capitol building, watching the sun set over Sacramento. "We did it," she said, squeezing my hand. "We actually did it," I agreed, still somewhat in disbelief. The new law went into effect on January 1st. It required HOAs to obtain homeowner approval before hiring security, mandated background checks and training for any security personnel, prohibited security guards from demanding identification or detaining residents, and created a state oversight office to investigate complaints about HOA conduct. The law also made it easier for homeowners to sue for harassment and required HOAs to pay legal fees if they were found to have acted in bad faith. It was not perfect, but it was a significant step forward. In February, I received a call from a national news network asking if I would be willing to be interviewed for a segment on HOA reform. The story aired in March and reached millions of viewers. I talked about my experience, the lawsuit, and the legislative fight. The segment also featured Rachel from San Diego and several other homeowners who had similar stories. The response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of emails and messages from people across the country who had dealt with HOA problems. Some were fighting their own battles, while others just wanted to share their stories and thank me for speaking out. The California Homeowner Rights Coalition expanded to become a national organization, with chapters forming in other states. We provided resources, legal referrals, and advocacy for homeowners dealing with HOA issues anywhere in the country. What started as my personal fight against harassment had grown into a national movement. Looking back, I sometimes thought about that first day when I noticed the black SUV rolling past my house. I thought about how angry and helpless I had felt, how the constant surveillance and harassment had affected every aspect of my life. And I thought about the choice I had made to fight back instead of just accepting it or moving away. Fighting was hard. It was expensive, stressful, and time-consuming. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the whole thing felt like too much, but I was glad I persisted. Not just for myself, but for everyone else who was dealing with similar situations. Bethany and I celebrated our first wedding anniversary in September with a trip to Napa Valley. As we sat at a winery overlooking the vineyards, toasting with glasses of excellent Cabernet, I felt genuinely at peace. "You know what the best part is," Bethany said. "What? You can take out your trash cans whenever you want now and nobody cares which direction the handles are facing." I laughed. "That is the best part of all of this. Trash can freedom. It is symbolic," she said with a grin. "It represents how you took back control of your life and your home." She was right. It was symbolic. Everything that had happened, from the petty violations to the harassment to the lawsuit to the legislative victory, was about the fundamental right to live peacefully in your own home without being subjected to arbitrary rules and intimidation. In October, I received a letter from Martin, the HOA president who had replaced Patricia. He wanted to update me on how things were going in Riverside Meadows. "The HOA is in the best shape it has been in years," he wrote. "We have positive relationships with residents. Our finances are transparent and healthy, and we are focused on maintaining the community without overreaching. I wanted to thank you for having the courage to challenge the old way of doing things. You made this neighborhood a better place." That letter meant more to me than the settlement check had. It was validation that the fight had been worth it, that real change was possible. The California Homeowner Rights Coalition continued its work throughout the year. We helped pass similar legislation in Nevada and Arizona. We provided support to dozens of homeowners fighting unfair HOA actions. We published research on HOA governance and best practices. The work was ongoing, but we were making a tangible difference. In December, I got a call from Michael Torres. "I wanted to let you know that Sentinel Protection Services is officially done," he said. "The owners were charged with fraud and operating without proper licenses. They will be paying fines and facing potential jail time." "Good," I said. "They should not be able to do to anyone else what they did to me. They will not. And that is because you stood up to them." After I hung up, I thought about Derek and Tony, the two security guards who had made my life hell. I wondered what they were doing now, whether they understood that what they had done was wrong. I hoped they did. I hoped they found legitimate work and left the intimidation business behind. As the year drew to a close, Bethany and I hosted a holiday party at our house on Sycamore Lane. George came, along with neighbors, friends, and several members of the California Homeowner Rights Coalition. The house was full of laughter, conversation, and warmth. Standing in my living room, watching all these people who had supported me and fought alongside me, I felt incredibly grateful. What had started as a nightmare had transformed into something meaningful. I had not just survived the harassment. I had used it as a catalyst for change. Bethany found me standing by the window, looking out at the street where security guards used to park and watch my house. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her arm around my waist. "Just appreciating how far we have come, and thinking about everyone else out there who is dealing with what I dealt with. I hope our work helps them." "It will," she said confidently. "It already has." She was right. We had changed the conversation around HOAs, homeowner rights, and the limits of private authority. We had helped pass laws that would protect people for years to come. and we had shown that ordinary citizens could fight back against unfair systems and win. The fight against HOA overreach and abuse would continue. There would be more cases, more battles, more homeowners who needed help. But now there was a framework for fighting back, a community of support and laws that provided real protection. As for me, I was finally able to just live in my house without looking over my shoulder. I could wash my car, take out my trash, and come home from work without worrying about being followed or harassed. It was a simple freedom, but one I would never take for granted again. The house on Sycamore Lane, which had once felt like a prison under constant surveillance, now felt like home. Bethany and I were building a life there, with plans to start a family and put down deeper roots in Riverside. The neighborhood, freed from Patricia's tyrannical rule, had become the peaceful community I had hoped for when I first bought the house. Sometimes, I still saw the old violation notices when I was organizing files or cleaning out drawers. The ridiculous complaints about trash can orientation, slightly yellow grass, and house numbers that were supposedly too small. They seemed almost comical now, evidence of just how petty and vindictive the harassment had been, but they also served as a reminder of why I fought back. Because those petty violations were never really about maintaining community standards. They were about control, about one person wielding power over others without accountability. And that kind of abuse, no matter how small it seemed, needed to be challenged. The California Homeowner Rights Coalition grew stronger with each passing month. We added a legal defense fund to help homeowners who could not afford attorneys. We created educational programs to teach people about their rights before they even bought into HOA communities. We worked with real estate agents to ensure that potential buyers understood what they were getting into when they purchased homes in HOA-governed neighborhoods, and we kept fighting for more legislative reforms. The Homeowner Protection and HOA Accountability Act was a great start, but there was more work to be done. We pushed for better financial oversight of HOAs, stricter limits on their ability to fine residents, and clearer processes for removing board members who abused their authority. In early January of the following year, I was asked to speak at a national conference on housing rights in Washington, D.C. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of advocates, lawyers, and homeowners, I told my story once more. But this time, I also talked about the victories, the changes we had made, and the work that still lay ahead. When I moved into my house on Sycamore Lane, I said, I never imagined that I would end up here, speaking to all of you about HOA reform. I just wanted to live peacefully in my home. But sometimes life pushes you in unexpected directions. Sometimes you have to fight battles you never wanted to fight. And sometimes, if you are lucky, those battles lead to something bigger than yourself. The applause that followed was energizing. These were people who understood, who had their own stories of HOA struggles, who were committed to making change. I was not alone in this fight, and neither were they. Bethany and I spent a few extra days in Washington, touring the monuments and enjoying the city. It felt like a celebration, a moment to pause and appreciate how far we had come. But we both knew that the work would continue when we returned to California. Back home in Riverside, life settled into a new normal. I continued my software consulting work, but I also devoted significant time to the coalition. Bethany had been promoted to senior paralegal at her firm and was using her legal knowledge to help with our advocacy efforts. George, now in his mid-70s, joked that I had given him a new sense of purpose. I was just coasting toward retirement, he said one afternoon while we worked on his garden, but watching you fight back inspired me. I joined the coalition's local chapter. We are keeping an eye on the HOA to make sure they stay on the straight and narrow." "That is great, George. We need people like you, people who have been around and know how things should work." "Well, I am happy to help, and I am proud of you, Frank. You did not just complain about a problem. You actually did something about it." In March, Rachel from San Diego won her lawsuit against her HOA and their security company. The settlement was even larger than mine had been, setting a precedent that HOAs could not use intimidation tactics without facing serious consequences. Rachel joined the coalition's board of directors, bringing her experience and passion to our leadership team. As spring arrived, Bethany and I learned that we were going to have a baby. The news filled us with joy and hope. We would be bringing a child into a home that we had fought to make truly ours, in a community that had learned hard lessons about fairness and accountability. "Our kid is going to grow up hearing about how their dad sued the HOA," Bethany said with a laugh as we discussed baby names. "Maybe it will teach them to stand up for what is right," I replied. "Or maybe it will teach them to avoid HOAs altogether," she joked. We spent the summer preparing for the baby and continuing our advocacy work. The coalition was now operating in 12 states, with more chapters forming every month. We had helped hundreds of homeowners resolve disputes with their HOAs, and we had contributed to legislative reforms in multiple states. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. Every time someone reached out to say that our resources had helped them, or that they had successfully challenged an unfair HOA action, it reinforced why we were doing this. Our daughter was born on a warm September evening. We named her Alina, and she was perfect. Holding her in the hospital, I thought about the world she would grow up in, the battles she would face, and the strength she would need. I hoped that our example of fighting for justice would guide her. When we brought Alina home to Sycamore Lane, neighbors came by with gifts and congratulations. The community that had once felt hostile and unwelcoming now felt like a true neighborhood, with people who cared about each other and looked out for one another. Martin stopped by with a beautiful handmade baby blanket that his wife had knitted. "Welcome to Riverside Meadows, little one," he said, smiling at Alina. "It is a much better place than it was a few years ago, thanks to your dad." As the months passed and Alina grew, I often reflected on everything that had happened. The harassment, the lawsuit, the advocacy work, and the changes we had made were all part of a larger story about power, accountability, and the importance of standing up for yourself. Patricia Henderson, wherever she was, had inadvertently sparked a movement that was changing how HOAs operated across the country. Her petty tyranny and the illegal harassment she orchestrated had exposed a systemic problem that needed addressing. In trying to make my life miserable, she had actually given me a purpose and a platform to help others. I hoped she understood that someday. I hoped she realized that her actions had consequences far beyond what she intended. But mostly, I just hoped she had learned that abusing power always comes with a cost. The California Homeowner Rights Coalition continued to thrive. We celebrated our 3rd anniversary in the spring, hosting a gala fundraiser that raised over $100,000 for our legal defense fund. Homeowners from across the state shared their stories, and several legislators spoke about the importance of continuing to push for reforms. Bethany gave a speech that night, holding Alina on her hip as she spoke into the microphone. 3 years ago, my husband was being followed and harassed by security guards hired by his HOA, she said. He was just trying to live in his home, but he refused to be intimidated. He fought back, and that fight sparked something bigger than any of us imagined. Today, we are protecting homeowners across the country, changing laws and holding HOAs accountable. And we are not done yet. The room erupted in applause. Looking at my wife and daughter on that stage, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and purpose. We had built something meaningful out of a terrible situation. As Alina grew into a toddler, she became a fixture at coalition events. She would toddle around the office, charming volunteers and reminding everyone why we were fighting. We were building a better future for the next generation, ensuring that they would not have to face the same abuses that so many homeowners had endured. The legislative wins kept coming. By the time Alina was 2, 12 states had passed versions of the Homeowner Protection and HOA Accountability Act. More states were considering similar legislation. The conversation around HOA reform had gone mainstream, with national news outlets regularly covering stories of HOA abuses and the movement to address them. I sometimes wondered what my life would have been like if I had just kept my head down, paid the bogus fines, and accepted the harassment. Would Patricia have eventually moved on to another target? Would I have just learned to live with the constant surveillance and petty violations? Maybe. But I was glad I would never know. Fighting back had been scary and difficult, but it had also been the right thing to do. It had led to justice, change, and a sense of purpose that I never would have found otherwise. On the 5-year anniversary of filing my lawsuit, the coalition organized a celebration in Riverside. Hundreds of people attended, including homeowners we had helped, advocates from across the country, and several of the legislators who had championed HOA reform. Michael Torres gave a speech reflecting on the case that started it all. When Frank first came to my office with his documentation of HOA harassment, I knew we had a strong case, he said. But I had no idea that this one lawsuit would spark a national movement. Frank did not just fight for himself. He fought for every homeowner who has ever felt powerless against an abusive HOA. And because of his courage, the landscape has fundamentally changed. Standing at that celebration, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by our work, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey from being harassed by fake security guards to building a national advocacy organization had been long and challenging, but every step had been worth it. Bethany pulled me aside during the celebration, Alina asleep in her arms. "Are you happy?" she asked. "I am," I said honestly. "I am happy with our life, our family, and the work we are doing. I never would have chosen to go through what I went through, but I am glad it led us here." "Me too," she said, kissing me softly. As the sun set on that celebration, I looked around at the community we had built, the changes we had made, and the future we were creating. The house on Sycamore Lane, where it all began, stood peaceful and secure, free from surveillance and harassment. Patricia Henderson had tried to make my life impossible. Instead, she had given me the fight of my life and a purpose that would last forever. The HOA that hired security guards with no legal authority had been sued, defeated, and transformed. And in the process, we had helped protect countless others from similar abuses. It was not the story I expected to live when I bought that house in Riverside. But it was the story I was proud to tell. The story that would shape the rest of my life, and hopefully, the story that would make a difference for generations to come.